To the level of RA5. It is thought that the level of fruit and vegetable consumption could influence the risk of some diseases in humans. One large study has examined the relationship between the level of fruit and vegetable consumption and the risk of mortality. This was a meta-analysis, which is a type of observational study that combines and summarises data from several previous similar studies. Meta-analysis provide good evidence and are widely used in epidemiological studies. State what is meant by the term epidemiology. Okay, so just being very careful here because they're very, very precise in the mark scheme. So it is about the occurrence, the occurrence, and it's about the spread. Okay, so how many cases you're getting and then what is happening in terms of its distribution and how quickly it's spreading transmission. Okay, and you need to give both of those in terms of your definition. Okay. A search of previously published research papers was used to identify studies for inclusion in the meta-analysis. However, not all possible studies were included. In most of the studies used, fruit and vegetable consumption was assessed using questionnaires. Suggest why the use of questionnaires to collect information about fruit and vegetable consumption may have led to some errors in the data. Well, basically, this is because you're talking about humans who may lie. Okay, this is not necessarily correct information. So we may have, being the nicest we can say, you might have forgotten how many portions of fruit and veg you had, but then you also might have just edged it a little bit to say, no, I definitely did have my 5 a day. So basically it's that, that you've got false data, possibly. False data, possibility. Oh, data, possibility. Okay, let me spin along. There we go. Right, one possible criticism of meta-analyses is that the people carrying them out select the previous studies to include, which could result in selection bias. Suggest one reason why an individual study might be considered invalid and therefore excluded from the meta-analysis. So an individual study that you might say is not acceptable is probably ones that when you look at it, you think that's not a reliable study because it's a small value set, small number of replicates. And otherwise, you might be saying that you're not happy with the sample makeup. So that would be things like saying it was a group of just females, just males, it was a certain age and only them, it was a certain weight range, it was attached to something else as well. So basically saying that it was not just about fruit and vegetables. Okay, state the effect that selection bias would have on the sample obtained. Well, basically it's just not a good sample. It's not a representative sample. And that's what we're always looking for if they're talking about selection bias. Okay, the results from this meta-analysis are shown in the graph. The risk of mortality was expressed as a hazard ratio, with a hazard ratio of 1 indicating no effect on the risk of mortality. Okay, so basically nobody said they were having 0 servings of fruit and vegetables, and even at 1 they have it lower than 1:1 hazard ratio. So they're saying there's a decrease there, and then you can see it getting kind of better, but there's definitely a tailing off here. The graph shows the 95% confidence intervals for the data. The confidence interval for 6 servings is wider than that for 2. What does that say about these 2 sets of data? So our 6 here is our confidence interval set, and 2 is this. So basically what that says is 6 must have a wider range of data. Okay. This study is consistent with the hypothesis that higher fruit and vegetable consumption is associated with a reduced risk of mortality over time. Explain why this observational study can only suggest a possible link between fruit and vegetable consumption and mortality risk over time. Well, basically, this is a study which is showing correlation, but that does not say causation, and that would be your straight mark. Okay, correlation does not necessarily mean causation. Okay, and your other nice big posh set of terms that you use all the time for this that would be worth putting in is that it is not necessarily taking into account confounding variables. And that's your question.